Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here. It is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023, and we have a lot to talk about. The first thing I'm going to say is, in spite of the title of this episode of UnWoke.Academy, by the way, I'm your host, Jonathan Broadbent. In spite of the title, I do actually like the game Monopoly. However, monopolies in the business world, and especially in finance, those can be not so good. And I want to drill down today to kick off our conversation on a trade magazine called Financial Planning. So here's basically what that looks like. As you might imagine, I make pretty concerted effort to stay apprised of what's happening in the financial marketplace and in the world of finance in general. That's banking and currency and exchange rates and consumer price index, all that stuff. I try to stay abreast of all those things, and part of that is trade publications, and part of the reason for the trade publications is I've noticed something. If you're at all conservative, and I hope that you are, or at least consider looking at the conservative messages. So in the world of news media, it's kind of known that news media has become very homogenous. And actually, there's something that comes to mind that you really need to look up and see for yourself. I think it's on YouTube and you can find it on Rumble and stuff. But somebody has actually comprised a series of different events, major sort of national events, and then they've taken news segments from local news channels all over the country, and then sort of spliced them together in a big screen with probably 30 or 40 different local news broadcasts from all over the country, and they're identical. It's actually the same copy that's being read by local representatives in a city near you. That's alarming. That means that those local community news sources are not doing any investigative reporting, or I shouldn't say any. They're not doing their own work, at least on some issues. What they're doing is getting a script. It shows up on the teleprompter. They show up at night and they read that script. And that's not a great thing. In the world of healthcare, and forgive me, I'm going to do my usual thing. I'm going to jump around a little bit and draw some analogies to other marketplaces. But in the world of healthcare, I think we've kind of come to terms with the fact that pharmaceutical firms have really captured a lot of healthcare, a lot of hospital systems. They pay so much money. There's so much money to just spread around that they're actually paying doctors, quite literally paying doctors bonuses to prescribe certain medicines. And that, if that isn't a conflict of interest, and the fact that we have these commercials, I see them all the time. And I think the United States is the only one, or one of very few nations on earth, that allow commercials on television advocating for the latest pill. And I see them all the time. I am amazed at how many pills there are. And the fact that those pills are really just kind of controlled by a very select few mega pharmaceutical companies. So we have that environment. Trust me, I know I'm in finance. I'm getting back to the financial topic, but I'm drawing an analogy. In the world of healthcare, you have these pharmacies, or pharmaceutical companies rather, that are collecting in billions of dollars, and they're conflicted on lots of things, but they're paying these bonuses to doctors to prescribe certain medicines, and then they're paying hospital systems some fees for the hospital systems to do research, and just the amount of money going from big pharma into what should be a client focused relationship, a patient focused relationship, is disheartening. It's trouble for sure. And again, I'm going to stay on the analogy of healthcare because it applies pretty much directly to finance as well. In that healthcare arena, when you have big pharma that's generating, they could just churn out these new pills. It seems like every few weeks there's some new sort of ailment that comes along that nobody's ever heard of, and there's a new pill that cures it. So add it to that massive shelf that you have in your medicine cabinet of the zillion different prescriptions, and lo and behold, it seems like nobody's getting any healthier, and everybody's spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month or thousands of dollars on all these pills. And the promise of the pills is that you're going to get better. And at the same time, there's been mass consolidation of those hospital networks. So where it used to be a local regional doctor might open up, and think of yourself, just think for a moment, if you went through medical school and you wanted to become a community doctor, it used to be the case that you could just rent some space and open up, and patients would come and see you. And then, free market capitalist society, you were allowed and encouraged to get other doctors and partner up with them and expand your office. And maybe you'd get several doctors in there. And if you were one of the first founding doctors and started the facility, then maybe you get a little bit of money from what they bring in. And then you expand it more and further and get more doctors and grow into a large full-sized hospital. And you might even have relationships and referral arrangements with other entities like dermatology and rheumatology and x-ray and all that stuff. And poof, great, you're a small business entrepreneur and you own this medical establishment. But that doesn't really exist anymore. Now what we have is an environment where, because of overregulation, it's really, I believe, effectively impossible to be a local, small, independent doctor. So if you're a doctor or know somebody who is independent, you can come back and correct me if I'm wrong. But they've all been gobbled up by bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger hospital networks. And now there are very few left. And people don't realize that a lot of the hospital systems, that they look like their competitors, they have a lot of commonality and co-ownership and those sorts of things. I've seen examples of that as well. So now you have these, it becomes like shooting fish in a barrel. And I hate to use the analogy, but there are shots as well. I won't get into that. I'm going to leave that for another time. But so there are medicines that can be sort of dumped into these pipelines, and then you have just this feeder fund. It's like a funnel of people who are constantly sick and unhealthy that are feeding in, and they think that they've got some choices in healthcare, and maybe they're down to like 2 or 3 hospital systems, or there's just one mega hospital that's within driving distance, and that's it. That's their choice. And there's no competition. No competition is a great environment for communists. That's what you want. You want an environment where you don't have to compete. You don't have to adjust your prices to try and keep in line with somebody else who can do something better or stronger or faster or healthier or less expensive. You want to be able to control that marketplace and that environment. And then, so now you just have this swirling whirlwind of conflict. And it's a terrible thing that we've gotten to this place in healthcare. Now, finance, it's the same thing. Okay, end of session. I'm kidding. I'm going to keep going, but really, truly, that's actually how the financial world has worked and evolved as well. It's not impossible to be an independent financial advisor or planner or broker, but it's really difficult. And as I've seen over the last 21 months, I am under weaponized regular. I'm under attack. And a whole bunch of people that I know who did things to counter the narrative. In my case, it was many. I was early on a national newscast called Nightline came in and mic'd me up, and my wife. They spent the day with cameras and filmed me, and I went on national news fighting the mask mandates for children, because I don't think children ever should have been masked during the COVID scare. So this all the things that I've done advocating for First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights and against jab mandates and lockdowns and against masking children and all that stuff. It put me on the radar. And friends of mine all across the board, from construction company to child psychology to lawyers, you name it, a whole bunch of people, we're all under attack by weaponized regulators who are threatening, harmful, exhausting, damaging, and they're just a money suck. So I'm no exception. And I'm in month 21. It's exhausting and grueling, but that's an example of how weaponized regulators work. And the result of that over several decades is little small businesses like mine, we just give up. Like, forget it. I can't keep up with just the constant attacks. By the way, on a related note, it is worth noting that many of those types of organizations are actually they're sort of quasi government. They actually survive on membership dues. So every year I have to pay in a certain amount, and those dues go to pay the big highfalutin salaries of the people who work there. I'm not going to get started on the caliber of people that work there. I'll save that also for another conversation. But we pay in these dues, but the lion's share of the dues that go in and pay the operating expense of these self-regulatory agencies, which means that we're an industry, the financial industry, and we regulate ourselves. The fees that go to pay the ongoing operational costs of those types of agencies is overwhelmingly paid by a small handful of the bajillionaire, multi-trillion dollar companies. So they also have massive teams of lawyers. And what's ended up happening is the regulatory agencies, they get beat up every time they go into the big places, because the big places have lots of lawyers and they have lots of ways of kind of wiggling around and getting out of trouble and everything. So on the small end of the scale, and that's definitely me, I have a little small consulting group, and we are definitely in the crosshairs, and it's really easy to pick on us. And I mean, there are examples like several years ago, I had to go through this regulatory examination thing that was cooked up because somebody figured out that there's another company out there that uses the same last name I have. Broadbent is unusual, but I'm not the only one. There's another firm out there that was using my last name. Defending that, the fact that that actually exists, cost me about $20,000. And I was a debacle. I did actually eventually find that place, and I went and drove there and got a selfie in front of the picture on their lawn. So I've got we have the same last name. I went in. I'm not sure that we figured out. We think we have a theory about how we may be connected way back generations ago. Anyway, that's how the world of regulators and finance works. And the same thing holds true in lots of other areas like accounting firms, law firms, definitely law firms. And the pressure from bar associations is egregious and awful. And healthcare, all these different industries, they are pressured from on high, and the little ones are just constantly under the tank treads and crushed all the time. So we keep folding and going out of business, and then you get the big ones, and the plan for the big ones is you can make a big payday by selling out. So let's say that you're in any of those industries, accounting, a big medical practice, a good sized regional hospital or whatever. When you get to a certain size, some even bigger group comes along and offers massive buyout money. And banking is another example. So you get bought out, and everyone gets all excited because a handful of people at the top get like many millions of dollar payout and all that stuff, and then they phase out, and then poof, before you know it, that regional is gone, and now it's a mega regional, and then the mega regional gets bought out by a national, and then the national gets bought out by a global. That is where we are. The world of finance, the idea I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm the bearer of bad news. You need to know this. The idea of Wall Street firms, the concept is gone. The concept is misleading now. So you have these big towers on Wall Street, and they started off with the New York Stock Exchange and just that wonderful history and the nuance and ideas of ticker tape parades when people came home from World War II and all that stuff. Those firms, they're not even a shred of what they used to be. What they are effectively now is they're part of a big global behemoth. They own parts of each other, so in effect, they're really not as different and separate as you would think. They also kind of have they have tentacles and apparatus within government and within media, so they can control a lot of narrative. And when it comes to these whole conversations, and you hear them on TV and see them on those little mapping plotting software that you get at when you sign on online for stock trading and all that stuff, there tend to be these theme narratives, and I see them, which is why I get these trade publications. I make a point of it. I'm always getting the trade publications. I try to read through, at least skim the articles and all that stuff, and stay abreast of what's being said. The following is a hypothetical example. It is not a recommendation to buy or sell anything. It is an example of something that you might see, hear, and experience from the world of finance. And it might look something like this. All of a sudden, just like a news cycle talking about some incident, like somebody thinks they saw a UFO, in similar fashion, you might all of a sudden hear all these different financial firms all talking about small cap, emerging market, European something. I'm intentionally being vague. This is, again, not a recommendation to buy or sell anything. That is a hypothetical example. So everybody's all of a sudden talking about the same thing, and then there are like newspaper articles that come out, and then there's the evening news, and then there's some talk show people and they're talking about it, and then you get like the daytime people that run around hooting and hollering and screaming, yelling about how exciting that particular investment philosophy is, and that's just such a great market, and they will do that. Candidly, I don't know how it's legal. Maybe because they have so much money that they're kind of untouchable and they have massive legal departments. I don't know. But it in my mind, it goes back to those that overlay that I saw of news media coverage, where you had like 30 or 40 or 60 different local news outlets that were just reading from the same script. And that's horrible. It's horribly damaging. And I said that there's a problem with Wall Street and the concept of Wall Street, because what we're thinking, we Americans, is we're stockpiling some money. We've got a 401k. We're putting some money aside, and it goes into the big mega firm. And the big mega firm has some sort of logo on it that makes us feel sort of vaguely patriotic and harken back to the days of yore when Wall Street was this behemoth, and they did all this great trading, and we can buy stock in these great emerging and developed and wonderful American companies and all that stuff. That's mostly gone. What we have now is Wall Street firms that are keenly interested in the profit of collecting massive amounts of money in the globalist context, with the intention of funneling that into far left companies and causes. And geographically speaking, very little of that has any intended destination within the United States. So it's not telling you, it's overwhelmingly, it's really not interested. Those managers, those big financial firms, are not interested in growing the American economy. I'm sorry, but I got to call it the way I see it. So when it comes to small developing regional small business and the potential for it, the potential is absolutely there. Go anywhere in the US. There in my neck of the woods where I live, there are all kinds of metallurgy, machine shop background, really technical, incredible skill. For those types of firms to find operating capital is really difficult. And then you add in, I mentioned earlier that banks are under the thumb screws. Banks are crushed by regulation as well. And regional banks are closing at an alarming rate. I think somebody said I was 8 or 900 community regional banks closed during the Obama era. And we're doing the same thing again under the Biden administration. So those are all closing. And now in this issue, I want to read it in case you want to look it up. You may be able to find it online or find a copy. In the November-December 2023 financial planning issue, there is an article on, it's called the $16 trillion pool. And most effectively, what it's saying is that most investments are going through 10 firms, a total of 10 firms. That's it, 10. And those 10 firms are not 10 independent, separate firms like you might want to hope. I believe, and based on a lot of the research I've been doing over the last many years, there's a lot of common ownership between those 10 firms. So imagine, if you will, and this is not an accusation, not yet, but imagine that you have a whole bunch of elected representatives, people in Washington, D.C., that have massive ownership in this. Then now what you have is these investment managers who are paying advisors bonuses to sell their product. The firm is pushing the advisors to sell the specific product. They're getting kickbacks, and the few managers that are out there are all operating as if they have lots and lots of different names, and they do. There are lots of different mutual funds, but what if at the end of the day it's really kind of one behemoth giant monopoly, or it's a few, and there are just a small handful of families, uber wealthy, multi-billionaire families that own large chunks of, let's assume, all 10 of those firms. It really kind of makes it look like those 10 firms, or maybe not so much 10 firms, but 10 fronts for a handful of globalist, multi-billionaire families. All the more reason to go UnWoke, to start talking about investing locally in local economies, getting money out of these far left woke managers and getting into the small stuff that we're talking about. It's not necessarily just small, micro, and emerging markets and seed money for startup businesses. There are some great developed businesses as well. But what we need to do, and I'm working on it, is finding those non-woke, those patriotic, freedom-loving, non-leftist managers out there who are managing small funds. They're shunning all of that pressure to get all of the money into the woke left handful of big companies out there, and are finding real value and real investment opportunities. That's where the rubber meets the road. I'm Jonathan Broadbent. This has been another exciting episode of